Hello and welcome to the very first tutorial of the Platemaker Wizard. Now this tutorial is divided into two parts and this video will be covering part 1 of the tutorial. So after you've installed the Platemaker Wizard, open Excel and then all you need to do is to go to add-ins. You'll see the Platemaker Wizard menu. You simply go down to Help Demonstration Workbook and you open the instruction manual by pushing this button here. Now the instruction manual is extremely comprehensive. There is a little section at the beginning which introduces the wizard and in particular covers the structure of the demonstration workbook. If you want to see the demonstration workbook, you can click this button here and this opens the demonstration workbook, which gives you an example of what the Platemaker Wizard can do. But the structure of the demonstration workbook is covered here, and in particular page 5, I draw your attention to the flat data worksheet, which is here. I'll show you this. And the instruction manual will explain how this flat data table is a general solution to the problem of how you capture a complex experiment, no matter how many independent experimental variables you have in the experiment, and no matter how many measured variables are being returned by your plate reading machine. So it's very worth reading about that if you have time. However, we are going to cover the first tutorial here on page 11, tutorial 1, part 1, a basic ELISA time course experiment. So all you need to do after you've read this section is you click on part 1 and this will take you straight to the first tutorial. So let's now do the first tutorial together. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to add-ins, and if you have purchased the program, the first thing you need to do is go to program options and put the program into tutorial mode like so. The reason you need to do that is if you don't do that, you will not see all the tutorial templates, which are only visible when the program is in tutorial mode. We want to select tutorial 1, the data analysis demonstration template, so we simply click on this and click run template like so. And you'll see that the Platemaker Wizard is now building this template. So once it has built this template, you will have these maps. And if you now go back to the tutorial, you'll see the maps here. Figure 10 describes the experiment. But basically, this is a time course experiment. You can see it's 3 different experiments. And each experiment has 3 plates. On those plates, there are 2 compounds each. They are tested at these log doses shown here. And this is in the presence of an EGFR time course, the time course running this way. And finally, the last 2 columns are dedicated to controls, which are in quadruplicate, whereas the plate replicates of the experiment are just in duplicate. So you see they're duplicate here, and they're quadruplicate in the controls. So this is a typical type of experiment that might be done in a laboratory. You can see that if we go to the absorbance, obviously it's empty, we have no data in here. We're going to import some data into here, and then we're going to analyze it and produce some graphs. So let's do that together. So we return to our instruction manual, and you can see we're going to go to the Platemaker Wizard data folder. So we do that simply by going to Documents, and in Documents you will see there is a shortcut to the Platemaker Wizard data folder. This by default is located in the public directory on your computer in the public documents. However, as explained in the tutorial manual, these data folder paths can be altered in the program options menu, so that if you have a network and you want all your workbooks shared on a network so they're accessible by all computers, then you can change to a network drive. But for now, this is just in the default local drive on my computer. So what we're going to do is you can see that in this folder there is a folder called tutorial, which is installed with the Platemaker Wizard. We simply double click on this and you can see another folder called import practice data. We double click on this one and then you can see there are all these different Excel files. Actually, some of these are CSV files, some of them are Excel files, and all but one of these is the same data set for the second experiment, the demonstration experiment, which will be part 2 of this tutorial. However, there is one single file that is for this tutorial, part 1, and this is the data analysis demonstration data. So we're going to open up this single workbook. So we do that by double clicking, and you can see it is 996 well plates worth of data, and this matches the 9 empty plates inside the data analysis demonstration workbook. At the moment, those plates contain the information of what was done in each well of each plate. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get these data across into here, and the way we do that is we go add-ins, we go down to import data, and the first thing you can see is that it opens the source workbook. We only have one source workbook, so that's why this is grayed out. If you had more than one source workbook, you could select which one you want. We also only have one source work page, so it's selected there. And what we want is we first of all need to select the start address. So you can see the start address is not actually B4, it's actually B3. So we could just type B3 in here and you'll see it jump up there. Or the other way we can select it is we can right click and go directly and select like so and push OK. We then need to tell the number of rows between the plates, and the safest way to do that is again to click on this field, right click, and then we need to simply select from the bottom of plate 1 to the top of plate 2, and we click OK, and you can see that is 3 rows. And we need it to go into the data analysis demonstration workbook. This is always the correct starting address, but you can double check just by right clicking and you'll see that it will go to the correct address, which is B7. And now we just simply close the source workbooks after import, so we can click here and we simply click import data, and you can see that when we do this, the data has now been copied across into our absorbance on the data analysis demonstration workbook as shown. So now if we go to our instruction workbook, you can see that we've now worked through all this section. We have imported the data, and now we're ready to graph the experiment. So let's do this together. So if we return to the Platemaker Wizard data, you will see that there is a folder called Graph Templates, and if we go into here, you will see that there are 3 supplied templates. Now, as you work in your laboratory and you develop all these different experiments, you could end up with many templates. These are just the ones that are shipped with the program. And the one that we need is the time course template. So I'm going to open this template. This is just a standard Prism Graph file. And all it is, you can see all I've done is I've created a single graph with a single data set. So I've just simply created, and the reason I've done that is because I've wanted to format it nicely. So I've just worked on graphing a single time course of a single drug. The way I've set it up is we have the EGF exposure time in minutes, and we have the drug dose, which in this case is an EGFR inhibitor, as different plot points, going from 0 in black down to 1000 nanomolar in purple. Now if we look at the data behind this graph, you can see that how we've done this is the x-axis is just the EGFR exposure time. This is the different drug doses, and you can see that we just have mean and standard error of mean. So that's the format of the data that we need to give Prism Graph in order for it to generate these graphs. So let's do that. So what we're going to do now is we close the time course graph. So we are now ready to generate our Prism Graphs summary table, which creates the appropriate table for the data table inside our Prism Graph template file. So if you remember, we've just for the data table inside our Prism Graph template file. So if you remember, we've just looked at that. What we need is we need in the x-axis on the rows of the table, we need the EGFR exposure time, so we put that into row. And we need in the columns, remember it's looking at different doses of each compound, so we need the dose to go into the columns. That will be the graph legend, so we put that into columns. And then we want different graphs of compound and experiment. So the graph heading will be compound experiment 1, compound experiment 2. So we need to put these into the filter as such. The plate number and sample numbers we do not need to worry about, so we can just leave those. And remember, we want to calculate the mean and the standard error of mean. That was the background table for our graphs. So we simply select calculate standard error of mean, and then we push OK. And now you can see it's generated our appropriate statistical summary table, and these data will then go into Prism Graph to create all our different Prism graphs. So you can see it's also created a live graph here. We'll just move that up here. And then in order to see our add-ins again, we just click on a cell and you can see it comes back. Now, what we're effectively going to do is we're going to run a program which will go through and behind the scenes step through each drug. So you can see it'll go to afitinib, then it'll copy these data across to Prism Graph, then it'll go to carboplatin, copy these data across to Prism Graph, then it'll go to doxyrubicin, and so on. However, there is a slight problem here, and that is we want the DMSO control to be present, the zero dose, in every single plot. So what we really want it to have is we actually want it to have multiple items. We want it to have this DMSO present with doxyrubicin. That's the actual data that we want to send to Prism Graph. Then we want it to step from doxyrubicin to erlotinib, but holding DMSO present, like so. So how do we indicate to Prism Graph Generation program that's what we want to do? Well, it's very easy. All we do is we simply select DMSO as a filter, and that tells the program that when it starts stepping through compound, it always has to have DMSO present. So that's the way you communicate it to the Platemaker Wizard Prism Graph Generation program. Okay, so we're now ready to run the Prism Graph Generation program. So let's do that. So we go add-ins, we go generate Prism Graphs, and now you can see we have just the three variables, which are the three filters, and we can put them in either of two places. So we want different graphs of compound and experiment number. So both the compound and the experiment number is going to go into the main title of the graph, and nothing is going into the y-axis. In the next example, part 2, you'll see how the y-axis title can also be used. But for now, we just want to put compound and experiment number, like so. Now, this order is important because it controls how the graphs are grouped inside the generated Prism Graph file. So at the moment, it's going to do compound A, experiment 1, compound A, experiment 2, compound A, experiment 3, then compound B, experiment 1, compound B, experiment 2, compound B, experiment 3. If, however, I was to put it around the other way, so I was to put it as experiment number and compound, then it would go experiment 1, compound A, B, C, D, E, experiment 2, compound A, B, C, D, E, experiment 3, compound A, B, C, D, E. So depending on how you order it here will control how it's grouped inside your final Prism Graph file. Now I personally would prefer it compound A, experiment 1, 2, 3, compound B, experiment 1, 2, 3. So therefore I am going to put it around the way so that it's compound and then experiment number. You may prefer to do the other way around. So that's the first thing. We now need to select the master file or the template file that the program is going to use to put all this data and create all the graphs. And remember, we've already looked at that file, so if we push the button you can see it was called the time course template. We looked at that earlier. But once you've opened this, it'll always open at Platemaker Wizard Data Graph Templates. But of course you can maneuver anywhere on your computer and select any appropriate Prism Graph file that you've created. Remember, it's not an actual true Prism Graph template file. They're a different type of file. It's just a standard Prism Graph file, but the Platemaker Wizard is using it as a template. So we're going to use time course template. That's the one we looked at. We simply select open, and then we push generate graphs. Now we get one further dialog box which is asking us for the y-axis title of all the graphs. And remember, this was just a basic experiment that just looked at absorbance. So we're just going to type absorbance in here, like so. And we'll also just type units, like so. And then we click OK, and off it goes. So behind the scenes, it's flicking through all the different filters up here. it's generated all the different data, and now it's running a script file inside Prism Graph to create a file with all the graphs generated based on the single graph that was in the template file. It's finished that now. You can see it's created a hyperlink to the file it's created. So if I now click on Absorbance Graphs, it'll now open that file, and you can see that now this file, rather than having a single data table, it has each of my drugs, experiment 1, 2, 3, you can see like that, and we can look at the graphs. So there is afitinib, experiment 1, there's afitinib, experiment 2, there's afitinib, experiment 3, there's carboplatin, experiment 1, carboplatin, experiment 2. You can see the error bars, and you can see that we've created now 18 different graphs because we have 6 different compounds and we have 3 experiments each. So 6 threes, of course, are 18. So there's the 18 graphs that you can look at. So you can see how quickly it is possible to generate a lot of graphs and save you a lot of time rather than having to manually step through your pivot tables and paste all this data. So that is the first visualization we want. But remember, this experiment is two-pronged. This is all the individual experiments being plotted, but we also may want just the 6 compounds now of n equals 3 of the mean and standard error of mean of the 3 experiments. So let's do that. So we'll save this, and now we're ready to do our second visualization. So in fact, we need a slightly different table. So we're going to do that. So we're going to go down to here and we're going to go create statistical summary table. Again, it's still going to be EGFR exposure time in row. We still want the doses in columns. We still want the compounds in filters. But this time we want to see the mean and standard error of mean of each experiment. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an individual table for the 3 experiments. We're going to calculate the standard error of mean, and then we simply click OK. And now you can see we now have a in-between table here, which has the mean of the 3 experiments, and this is now the mean and standard error of mean of the 3 experiments, not the sample numbers. So we can now generate our second Prism Graph table from here. Remember, we want DMSO present in all our graphs. So once again, we need to select DMSO. Now we simply go up to here, we go add-ins, we go generate Prism Graph. We want compound in the main title. And remember, there's no experiment this time because it's the mean of the 3 experiments. We simply push the select key and we select our time course template again. We now say generate Prism Graph. And now we get a file exists, because remember, the default name of the file that it creates is simply the Prism Graph version of your name of your workbook. So we already have done that for the individual experiments. So we need to give it a slightly different name. So let's just call this data demonstration pooled data, or we could call it n equals 3 or something like that. We'll just call it pooled data. And now we simply click OK. Once again, we need to type in our y-axis, which is simply absorbance. So we do that, absorbance, and remember it's units. We just put units, and then we simply click OK. And once again, it's now stepping through the compound filters, and it's creating all the graphs in Prism Graph. So we have a new hyperlink. If we click on this hyperlink, we now have another Prism Graph file. And this time, of course, there's only 6 tabs because this is just the mean and standard error of mean of the 6 experiments. And these are the appropriate graphs for each of the 6 compounds. So you can see that now we've extracted and visualized all the data of these 9 96-well microtitre plates that form part of this time course experiment. Okay, a few other brief notes. You might be wondering, well, could we have not generated the mean and standard error of mean of the experiments from this particular table? And the answer is no. And the reason the answer is no is because if I select, say, doxyrubicin, you will see that the count of the variable is not 3 but 6. And the reason it's 6 is because it's counting all the data points for doxorubicin. But remember, each experiment is in duplicate, and then the experiment was done 3 times. So altogether, that's 6 data points. So that is why you can't just simply use the underlying Excel statistical summary. You must ask it to plot the individual experiments so you get the correct standard error of mean. And this is why we created this second table. Now, one final thing before we finish this tutorial is to show you where the data that we've been working on has actually been saved. So first of all, whenever you run a template, so I'm just going to run another template. Let me just run tutorial 3 template for a minute. When you run a template and it's a tutorial template, it automatically is saved in a particular location on your computer, and I'll show you where that is now. So if we go to Documents and we use the Platemaker Wizard shortcut, remember, if you've made no changes to the default, the Platemaker Wizard data is always saved in the public documents directory. And you can see that in the academic version, there is a folder called Projects. You click on Projects, and you can see that all your tutorials are being saved in a folder called Tutorials. If we click on that, whatever your username is, my username is Rod, so you'll there see your username, and if you click on that, you'll see folders for each of the tutorials that you've done. So remember, I just built this one, the final saved workbook build, and you can see there's the file. Now you might wonder, well, why does it create an individual folder for each workbook? But the reason it does, you'll see why now, because if I go to my data analysis demonstration, this is the one we've just been working on, you can see that it's saving the Prism graph files with the data, and this makes complete sense. So when you're doing a complex experiment, you won't just have a single workbook. You may generate lots of Prism graph files. You may also want to make notes about the experiment. You can save them in here. You may even write a report at the end, and you will also save it in there. So that way you have a nice folder with all the related information of that experiment in all the different files that you might generate. So you can see the Platemaker Wizard is also controlling the folder structure of all the data that you're generating using the Platemaker Wizard to keep everything well organized. Incidentally, if you're a commercial user and you've bought the commercial license, rather than saying projects, this will actually say customers. And that's the single change. And the reason why is the database, which we will see later, that holds information to all your experiments, is slightly different if you've got the commercial version of the program rather than the academic version. So in the commercial version, this will say customers, and then it'll have tutorials. Okay, so that is the end of part 1 of the Platemaker Wizard tutorial. If you're watching this tutorial on YouTube, please do like this video and also subscribe to the channel so that more people can learn about this great program that really helps in managing your microplate data. So for now, I just want to wish you well with all your experiments, and I'll see you in tutorial 1 part 2. Bye for now.